How can a 12-year-old be married in the United States?
New York became the most recent state to put age restrictions on marriage, and others are seeking to end child marriage. I'm Dan Ming.
I'm Femi Okay. You're in the stream.
And you're gonna go on the side, right here. There you go, just scoot in a little more. There you go. Great.
How old are you?
12. She's 12. She's 12. Yes.
How old are you?
Doesn't matter. 65. It's legal. I have permission from the parents. Permission from the parents. It's okay. When you have.
It doesn't sound right.
No. This is not right.
No. Do you want to do it?
Excuse me?
I'll take you to the police right now. All right?
Excuse me?
No, I'm
No,
sorry. I'm not letting you.
I have the permission from the parents.
This is illegal. I'll take
No. Please.
Yep.
Please.
Come on inside.
Where's the security? Thank you.
Y'all getting married?
Yes.
How old is she, man?
She's 12.
12? How old are you?
I'm a senior.
Senior.
Yeah, but I have parents' permission.
Okay.
No, it's okay because I have parents.
Is he okay with this?
Yes.
I don't think so, sir.
No. What?
No, you can come to me. We don't do that. No.
What?
He's going to the police, man.
I'm a senior. It doesn't matter.
I don't care. She's underage. You can't be doing this. It's not right.
Just hired to do the picture.
You've just been watching a stage experiment that went viral. It was meant to create awareness on the issue of child marriage.
And it's more common than you might think in the US. More than 167,000 young people under the age of 18 were married between 2000 and 2010, most of them young girls.
But 27 states don't have any limit on how young a child can be if their parents consent and the judge agrees to authorize the marriage. So here to help us discuss the movement to end child marriage in the United States. In our studio, we have Jeannie Smoot. She's the Senior Counsel for Policy and Strategy with the Tahiri Justice Center. Hello, welcome. In California, Sarah Tasneem is a child marriage survivor and advocate. In New York, Freddie Reese, founder and executive director of Unchained at Last, a group that works to end child marriage. And Nicholas Surrett is the author of American Child Bride and professor of women, gender and sexuality studies at the University of Kansas. Hello, everybody. Freddie, I'm just looking at some of the quotes that stood out for me from that staged experiment where the public was shocked. This is not right. This is illegal. This happens in the United States, Freddie, right?
Yes, so that exact setup, a man that age to a girl that age, is legal in a surprising number of states across the United States.
What's the youngest bride that you've heard about?
Well, so we at Unchained at Last retrieved the data that you were talking about before that found 167,000 children, and they were under 18, by the way, who were married in the U.S. in just 38 states between 2000 and 2010. And the youngest we saw was 12 years old. We saw a few 12-year-olds who were married. But keep in mind that the data in many states listed categories such as 14 and younger, 15 and younger. So we don't even know how much younger those children were. Could have been even younger than 12.
Julie, you better explain how this could possibly be legal.
I know it's really very shocking, and of course it was to us as we worked with Unchained to uncover some of those statistics, and even more so to examine the laws that are still on the books and have been left unexamined without criticism for so many years, in some instances over 100 years. And what we saw in that viral video really makes visible what has been invisible for far too long, and that is girls at very young ages and very large age differences in some instances wed to adult men in circumstances where we have to presume they were coerced into that union and had no choice whatsoever, and where what we know now of child marriage not only globally but in the US as well, wherever it happens, it has devastating lifelong consequences on the health, safety, and future of young girls. So these laws, I think, may have started out with an intention to preserve parental control or to put in place this or that control mechanism. But in essence, they established vast loopholes, gaping holes through which exploitation and abuse of young children could happen.
So we've got a lot of tweets from people around the world about child marriage in their countries. Take a look at my computer. Dalamu said, it's shamefully still a norm in parts of Nigeria. I taught at local schools 10 years ago, and the 10 to 15-year-old pupils were married, and many of them mothers. And then Samuel followed up. He said, teen marriage is still a big problem in some developing communities. It must never be encouraged. So Frady, I want to ask you this. A lot of people assume that this is something that happens in developing countries and not in a country like the United States. How many Americans do you think know that such a thing is legal here in the US?
Well, so this is one of the disappointing things, that Americans seem to be unaware that there's such a significant child marriage problem here in the United States, where marriage before 18 is legal in all 50 states, and that between 2000 and 2010, such a shockingly high number of children were married. I've been writing about this, op-eds in the New York Times and the Washington Post, and talking about this. And I know Jeannie at Tahirih Justice Center has been doing that also since late 2015, and yet it still seems that we just can't get the message out. It still remains a well-kept secret here in America that child marriage is a problem.
Let me just bring in Sarah. Sarah, you are helping getting that message out. I am going to show a picture from your wedding day. I'm going to show it right now, and then I would love you to tell us what was going through your mind when that picture was taken that day. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, this actually this photo was taken after my wedding. I was far younger than that when the spiritual marriage occurred. I was 15 years old when my spiritual marriage occurred, and I was basically told that I was going to marry the man that morning and was wed to him that same evening. So it happened very quickly, and the only thing that was going through my mind was basically, you know, trying to go along with the program. I don't think that I was fully aware of what was going on at the time.
And how old were you, and where were you in the world when you had your spiritual marriage?
I was 15 years old, and it was here in Los Angeles.
Okay.
So my spiritual marriage happened here in Los Angeles, and my civil marriage happened in Reno, Nevada, which is just a short drive from California for those of your viewers who live here in California.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Sarah's pointing out is just how staggeringly easy it is under some state laws to get married underage. And so, for example, in her case, and in the case of many states around the country, all that is required for a 16 or 17-year-old girl, for example, who legally is still a child, legally doesn't have all the rights and options an adult would have to escape a forced marriage or an abusive situation, in so many of these states, all that's required is one parent sign off on a form before a clerk's window, and in 5 minutes, her whole life's trajectory could change. And so I think it's not only the awareness of child marriage as a problem in the US, not only the laws that might permit it to happen in some states and in some contexts, but just how easy it is for it to happen in the majority of US jurisdictions. And we are making efforts with, in conjunction with a number of advocates now, to raise that alarm bell and to change those laws. But the majority of states still have some really egregiously slack laws in place.
So on this issue of the differing laws between states, I want to bring you into the conversation, Nicholas. We got a couple tweets from someone named H.G. Flores. You can see here, he says, if federal law sets voting age at 18, assuming 18 is recognized as adulthood, then marital age should be the same as voting age. And he followed up with this: if there are federal laws for drinking, voting, and marriage benefits and recognition, then marital age should be set at the federal level. Nicholas, can you explain to us why something like that can't happen in the US?
Well, it's sort of a long explanation, but in part, voting, drinking, and driving ages actually are set by the states, and the federal government has sort of coerced the states into having the same age for many of those things. But marriage law is regulated state by state, and there were reformers in the early 20th century who tried to get marriage law to be regulated at the federal level in order to be able to ban child marriage and also regulate divorce more evenly, and they failed in part because states were trying to safeguard their own rights to be able to protect what they thought was both the best age of marriage and the other sort of marriage regulations as well. So it's something we've seen before, and people have failed in trying to get the federal government to be able to regulate it.
I think it's also fair to note that there are different ages at which rights accrue to young people for different reasons, and there may be good justifications for that. I think what is so
staggering... Give us a couple of the reasons, because people would be curious as to why there would be different ages, different regions at different states. Why can't it just be 18 for everybody?
Right. Okay. It could be the nature of different decisions that you want to empower young people to make. You know, driving at a certain age, voting at a certain age, drinking at a certain age, based on research and evidence, for the most part, about what are the risks and harms that those kinds of activities pose to those young people at those ages.
Right.
What I think is so staggering is to find that we have an age at marriage that may be out of sync with the statutory age at which you can legally consent to have sex in that state. And so effectively, a lower age at marriage than the age at which you consent to have sex can serve as a workaround for predatory adults to access young girls they couldn't have legal relations with otherwise. And so I think there's a disconnect that we need to pay attention to, and then some different ages that may be appropriate to the circumstances.
Let me tell you why there is a disconnect, or maybe try and explain a disconnect. There is a debate about this, Frady. It's not everybody is on board across all of the states about there being a set age of marriage, and that age being 18. This is Governor Chris Christie of New Jersey. He has a whole conversation about he believes in protecting young people, but he doesn't believe in there being a set age limit. He says because an exclusion without exemptions would violate the cultures and traditions of some communities in New Jersey based on religious traditions. So he's saying he is actually backing his communities if they feel they have a cultural, traditional, or even religious reason. You would say what to that?
I would say, first of all, give me a second while I vomit into the closest garbage can, because that was disgusting what Governor Christie said there. All right, violate cultural, religious traditions. What is he talking about? I don't know of any religion that requires child marriage, and I have publicly challenged Governor Christie to come forward and tell us which religion in New Jersey or anywhere else requires child marriage, and he has not responded. So first of all, it's really offensive to the religious people of New Jersey for Governor Christie to come forward and somehow decide that there are religions that are requiring child marriage, when in fact, this bill, as it made its way through the legislature, it passed with overwhelming bipartisan support in the New Jersey legislature, would have ended all marriage before 18. It actually had very strong public support, including from clergy members from many different faiths. There was no member of the public who came forward to testify against the bill to ban child marriage in New Jersey. So Governor Christie, I'll say it again, I don't know which religion you're talking about, and you need to come forward and tell us which religion you've identified that is forcing children into marriage.
So Frady, another place we've seen legislation recently is in California, and the American Civil Liberties Union, which is a civil rights group, the California branch actually came out against an age limit, or a specific age limit that was being proposed in California. And we got this comment from somebody who represents the group, and Jeannie, I want to pose it to you after we hear it, but take a listen to what she had to say.
California has a strong existing legal infrastructure and systems to protect young people. For example, family court judges with training and knowledge of child abuse laws must approve all marriages. Our concern is that a blanket marriage ban may do more harm by driving abusive relationships underground, and may also harm those young people who willingly enter a marriage, such as young parents who are already shouldering adult responsibilities. What we need are approaches that support vulnerable youth, dig in on what we already know is working in California, and empower young people to make healthy decisions and lead healthy, fulfilling lives.
So Jeannie, what do you make of that argument that a blanket ban would just drive the abuse that happens underground?
I think in the extreme cases, the abuse that happens is already underground. So I don't have that concern with respect to a blanket ban. And in fact, I do believe that it is the most protective of children from forced marriages and the other harms of child marriage. To this point about the existing system in California working, we have evidence. We've heard from survivors for whom that's not been the case, who have not been caught up and have fallen through the gaps and cracks in protection in the state. In addition, I think this comment reflects really what those who don't specialize in these type of forced marriage cases, child marriage cases, often wish to believe, which is that the existing court systems and safeguards are sufficient. We're facing a battle not only in educating people around the U.S. as to what the problem of child marriage is, is, but also what the nature and scope of the solution is that's needed, and that it's not enough to have a court interview here or one safeguard there, that we need a combination of factors, hopefully age 18, and if not, at least an age floor that's at least age 16, which Governor Christie himself agreed to, and a judicial process that's really robust and ends in emancipation. That is to say that the minor who moves forward to marry is actually someone with the legal status and rights of an adult, like a fast forward to their age 18 birthday, so that we're not putting a child in the position of navigating a relationship without all the rights and options she would need to protect herself if she is facing abuse or coercion.
Sarah, what did you want to add? Sarah?
Well, what I wanted to add is that I believe that the minor should be fully emancipated before they get married, if there is an exception, which I don't believe there should be.
That's a legal term, Sarah. Do you want to explain what that means so everybody's not been in that position?
Well, if you are emancipated as an adult, an emancipated minor, you share the same, basically, rights as an adult. So you can enter into a contract, you can earn the right to make a living. When I was 15 years old, I did not have those rights. And so I know that Frady can also speak to this, but minors who try and leave their abusive marriages are sometimes turned away from homeless shelters because they're not legally adults. And so I think that that is just putting an undue burden on an already abusive relationship.
I think this term of emancipation, basically the law in each state defines what turns a child into an adult and what are the rights of a child versus the rights of an adult. And there are many doors that may be closed to a child that would be wide open to an adult because of limitations on leaving home, because of limitations on seeking counsel with an attorney or from a medical provider.
Let's just slow the conversation down a little bit. So
yes.
if the age of being able to marry in your state is below 16 or below 18, say, if any abuse happens in that relationship, that marriage, that young person cannot go to a shelter.
It depends on the state. So this is the truth of the mess we have with 50 states.
Right?
Yes, 50 states, 50 different legal regimes across all of these different things. When can you get a protective order? When can you enter a contract? When can you establish a home of your own?
So this speaks to the point of,
yes,
let's just make it 18 for everybody.
There you go. The common thread is that all those who are minors are vulnerable to abuse and coercion, and that generally speaking, across almost every state, 18 is the age of legal adulthood.
Because you could then, perhaps if your state was quite rigorous, you could then take your young bride, your young child, to another state to get married.
Absolutely. That's one of the problems with a patchwork of protection around the United States. Even as we move in various states to close those gaps and loopholes, so long as there are other states where where it's still so easy, then that still leaves that person, that young person, without full protection.
Nicholas, let me show you something here. Let me just show Nicholas something here, because there's some historical context to this. This is CBS News. New York ends child marriage, raising age of consent from 14 to 18. This was this month, Nicholas. I'm just wondering how much there has been tension between the idea of children marrying over time in the United States. I know you've looked into that in quite some detail.
Yes, so there was not all that much tension about it in the colonial period and through the 19th century because children weren't protected in the way that they are now. So children worked, they by and large did not go to school. The idea that children might marry at early ages was in keeping with children doing lots of adult-like things at early ages. But that's not the case for the 20th century. The one thing I would point out here in relation to the conversation about the patchwork of laws is that that's been a long theme, first of all, but also that the marriage laws that are meant to keep children out of marriage were not passed, at least originally, to protect children. They were passed because parents wanted to be able to control whether their children got married, because parents might want their children working in their homes, or they wanted to make sure that girls who married men, those men were not after their girls or their daughters' inheritances. The other reason that the age of marriage is sometimes lower than that for the statutory rape age is that marriage has traditionally been seen as a safe and protected place for girls and women. That is not true, but legally that was sort of what people believed about marriage. And so it was perfectly acceptable to make a girl able to marry before she could have sex outside of marriage, because the presumption always was that if she was having sex within marriage, she would be protected by her husband. We know, of course, that's not accurate, but that's some of the sort of ideology that undergirds letting girls marry, even though we clearly recognize that there are problems with it.
So a lot of the exceptions that we see in different laws around the US center on whether or not the girl in question who would be married is pregnant. And we got a video comment on what actually happens to young mothers who marry in these situations from Vivian, who's a law professor in the United States. Take a listen, and then Frady, I'll get you to respond.
Women who marry early are more likely to never complete high school, to earn low wages, and to live in poverty. They experience worse physical health and mental health than those who marry later. If a girl gets pregnant, many people believe that it's better for her to marry the child's father than to not. But girls who get pregnant and marry are even less likely to ever go back to school than teen mothers who don't marry. And for young mothers who marry then divorce, the risk of poverty is higher than for young mothers who never marry or who delay marriage.
So Frady, do you think that a pregnancy should factor into an exemption for someone who's, say, 16 or 17 when it comes to marriage?
Absolutely not. And so Vivian Hamilton and her important research has been very helpful to us in trying to explain to legislators that pregnant teenage girls are not better off getting married. And all the reasons she gave, that's one really important factor. The other really important reason not to just marry off a pregnant teenage girl is that we have seen in states that have pregnancy exceptions to the minimum marriage age, that these exceptions have been used to cover up rape and to force girls to marry their own rapist. One of the shocking examples of this in the United States was Sherry Johnson, who was married at 11 in Florida after she was raped and got pregnant. And we've seen other stories like this that have made national headlines, and I'm sure, unfortunately, many other stories that have not made national headlines. Pregnant teenage girls forced to marry their own rapist to cover up a rape.
I think it also compounds vulnerability, because if you have a girl who is coerced to have sex in the first place, then she may be being abused in the relationship, and a girl who is abused is 6 times more likely to get pregnant. Once pregnant, she's more likely to be pressured to marry. Once married, she's 24/7 isolated within a home, which may actually be violent. So I think these are the kinds of compounded dependencies and vulnerabilities that we're seeking to address.
Nicholas, what were you going to say?
I was going to say also that I think that much of this speaks to sort of conservative ideologies about sex itself. So lawmakers have, over the course of the 19th and 20th century, seen marriage as the solution to sex outside of marriage and as the solution to pregnancy, because they believe in an idealized version of marriage where a girl or a woman is protected. So this is one of the reasons also why we continue to allow this, is this idealized version of marriage that does not in fact match up with how lived on the ground marriages are being enacted by real people.
Right. Guess, look at this. This is child marriage legislation. Hold tight for a moment. Frady, I just want to share something from your organisation, which is basically the United States, where you can see the grey areas. These are the areas that a bill have been introduced, a child marriage legislation bill has been introduced. The areas of the black state, nothing, no action going on whatsoever. I have just heard 4 very compelling arguments. Sarah, do you feel that your advocacy is working?
I feel like I have a very small voice right now when it comes to this issue, because frankly, girls and young people who have undergone this are afraid. They're afraid of the abuse that they suffered at the hands of the person who married them. They're afraid of the abuse that their family has put on them in order to influence them to get married or to coerce them into that marriage. So they do not have the support to be able to stand up and talk about this issue. It has taken me a very long time to be able to talk about it. And I think there needs to be more opportunities made for young people trying to escape these horrific marriages.
Sure. Dan, where do you want to leave us before we head to the post show?
I'll give the last word to someone who has undergone this, who just sent us a tweet. So Carol wrote in. She said, "Child marriage has to end. I'm a survivor. Childhood has lost education, choice, and psychological isolation from society."
Jeannie and Sarah and Frady and Nicholas, thank you so much. There's still so much to unpack and talk about. We will do that in our online post show. If you go to aljazeera.com/the stream, that's where we can pick up the conversation there. If you have a comment that you want to get online to us, tweet it to Dan at #AJStream. Thanks for watching, everybody. See you online. Hello there, this is the post show for the US child marriage show. I'm sure if you were joining halfway through that show, you may not realise that we're talking about the United States. Dan, what's some of the reaction you've had online so far?
So a lot of people are actually shocked that it happens in the United States. They didn't know it. One guy even tweeted us and said, I once used the US as an example of a place where child marriage doesn't happen, and now I guess I have to correct that.
Yeah.
But I'd like to show a video comment we got from someone named Donna in the United States. And Sarah, I'd like to have you respond to it, so take a listen.
I'm a second-generation survivor of child marriage. My mother was 13 years old when she married, and in turn, when I was 16 years old, she married me off to a man that was nearly 15 years older than me. I suffered sexual exploitation, domestic violence, and was forced to drop out of high school before completing my 10th grade year as a result of my marriage. I now advocate for legislation that addresses child marriage, not only to prevent the sexual exploitation that occurs, but also to give children a fighting chance at realizing their full potential, which they cannot do when they are stuck in a life of servitude.
So Sarah, I'm interested in what she said about it being intergenerational, that her mother went through this and then put her through this as well. Is that something you've seen?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, my own parents' marriage was arranged, and my mother, while she wasn't underage, she was, still completing her education. And one of the points that Donna brought up, which I thank her for, coming forward and sharing her story, is the lack of education that happens when you're forced to marry. I was a freshman in high school when I was forced to get married. So I was forced to, leave my education and watch other young women still attending school and wondering why I couldn't continue on my educational pathway. So if there's one thing I'd like to point out, it's that you don't have any financial independence and you don't have an education. So your freedom is basically taken from you.
I want to share something with you, Frady. It's from an organisation called Day One, and they partner with youth to actually stop dating abuse and domestic abuse. It's a really interesting take on the conversation we've been having. So they sent us this statement. Day One supports the autonomy of youth, and we are mindful that two 17-year-olds, for instance, could make a reasonable, mature decision to marry based on one's military status, or because they're having a child, or a number of other reasons. This is going along the line of this exemptions idea, right?
Yeah, so this is unfortunately what we have seen, what I've seen a lot is that there are advocates who don't work in the child marriage arena, haven't seen child marriage survivors, haven't worked with people like Sarah, who has gone through this trauma, and think, well, marriage might have some positive impacts on a girl's life. If she's 17, why shouldn't we allow her to marry? And what I answered that is, it's so important to keep marriage at only age 18, when somebody is an adult, because before that time, a girl can just very easily be forced into a marriage or forced to stay in a marriage because she cannot easily leave home, get into a domestic violence shelter, retain an attorney because contracts with children usually are voidable, or even bring a legal action in her own name. So if there's a 17-year-old who's in love and has all the right reasons for marrying and is not being coerced and is not being forced, for her or him to wait until age 18 to marry, wait a matter of a few months, it's what? At worst, it's an inconvenience, right? For that 17-year-old who's being forced into a marriage, Waiting those few months until 18 is literally the difference between lifelong trauma and the possibility of hope and safety, because the day that child turns 18, she or he can reach out to an advocate like Unchained at Last, and we can help her to leave home. She's not a runaway. She's allowed to leave home. We don't have to worry about being charged with kidnapping for helping. We can get her into a shelter, because we've had shelters say even a day before her 18th birthday, if she's turning 18 tomorrow, we've had a shelter tell us, bring her back tomorrow.
I want to
she
jump
can
in
retain an
here.
attorney, bring a legal action in her own name.
Right.
So that's why it's so important for her to wait until she's 18, even if she's being, married off willingly and
Jeannie's
not
trying to get in here.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I want to jump in here and make 3 critical points. One, that I want to make sure that anyone out there who's listening, who is an underage girl and who is facing a forced marriage or trying to get out of a forced marriage, understands that there is help and hope out there. All of these legal obstacles that we're pointing to, we at Tahririh have been able to help individuals facing those threats with creative and dogged advocacy. It takes a lot more, both on our parts and on her parts, and that's one of the reasons.
Give us an example, because I'm curious about that, because you spent all of the show talking about the problems,
yes,
and none of the creative ways you get around them. Give us one example very quickly.
Well, we have been able to work with shelters that do take in minors that are facing forced marriages, that will see that person who's fleeing an abusive and neglectful home, and depending on the state laws and the latitude that they give that shelter, take her in and give her a safe place to be. So there are options. It's just that there are fewer options, and it takes more concerted work and more dogged advocacy to make them available to a young person.
Sure.
The second is, of course, it's better to reach the age of legal adulthood first. That's why when Tahririh has supported some of these state laws that have had some exceptions in them, we've needed them to be very narrow and pegged to legal adulthood. 16 or 17-year-olds, hopefully 17-year-olds, who are emancipated and empowered with all of those rights that we just mentioned are so critical to get to safety. And I think overall, though, this point that Freddie is raising is so critical. That is, what is the delay going to do to a genuine young couple? It will actually put them on firmer footing for the rest of their lives, whereas that delay may save someone from a nightmare for the rest of her life.
Dan, last word.
I'll give the last word to Kezia, who just tweeted us. She says, girls should be taken to school and not married off. Educate a girl, don't make her a bride.
Jeannie, Sarah, Freddie, Nicholas, thank you so much for your insight and your experience talking about child marriage in the United States. We really appreciate it today. Take care, everybody.